With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Russia launched 420 drones and 39 missiles, including 11 ballistic missiles, at Ukraine overnight, striking infrastructure and residential areas in 8 regions, President Volodymyr Zelensky said. Dozens were injured. Ukraine's air defenses intercepted most missiles with Western support. The attack occurred as U.S. and Ukrainian officials prepared for talks in Geneva aimed at ending the 5-year war. Zelensky spoke with President Trump and thanked him for peace efforts. Negotiations remain stalled over territory claimed by Russia. Discussions are expected to cover post-war recovery and a potential prisoner exchange, as Russia reportedly returned 1,000 Ukrainian bodies and received 35 of its own. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio denied American government involvement in a deadly gunfight between Cuban border guards and a U.S.-flagged speedboat, calling the incident very unusual. Cuban authorities said 4 armed men were killed after allegedly opening fire during an identification check near Villa Clara province.
They're looking for, I don't know who has possession of the vessel, which is the first thing we would want to have. We obviously want to have access to these people if they are American citizens or U.S. residents. But I'm not going to speculate now because right now still a lot of the information that's out there is information that's been provided by the Cubans. We are going to verify that information independently and reach our own conclusions.
UK Business Secretary Peter Kyle said he's confident the 2025 U.S.-UK economic prosperity deal remains intact despite President Trump's new 10% temporary global tariff. The Supreme Court ruled Trump lacked authority under one statute, prompting the administration to impose tariffs under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 for 150 days. Kyle said UK officials contacted U.S. counterparts and believe the negotiated terms still stand. The EU has paused ratification of its U.S. trade deal following the ruling. President Trump said tariffs had generated significant revenue and strengthened U.S. economic and security interests. The International Monetary Fund warned that U.S. public debt could reach 140% of GDP by 2031 under current policies, urging Washington to reduce its fiscal deficit. U.S. debt has surpassed $38 trillion and is projected to reach $39 trillion by April, with the deficit rising to about $1.8 trillion last year. The IMF says the current account deficit is too large and called for fiscal consolidation. The IMF also urged coordinated trade policy and narrowly applied tariffs. U.S. growth is forecast at 2.4% in 2026, with inflation not returning to 2% until early 2027. Hillary Clinton told the House Oversight Committee she had no knowledge of criminal activities by Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell and said she never met Epstein, flew on his plane, or visited his properties. She expressed shock at his crimes in 2008 plea deal. Former President Bill Clinton, who also agreed to testify after lawmakers threatened contempt, previously flew on Epstein's plane and had contact with him, though a spokesperson denied knowledge of wrongdoing or visits to Epstein's island. Lawmakers said they're seeking answers about Epstein's wealth and possible government ties, but are not accusing the Clintons of crimes.
The American people have a lot of questions. To my knowledge, the Clintons haven't answered very many, if any, questions about their knowledge or involvement with Epstein and Maxwell. Again, no one's accusing at this moment the Clintons of any wrongdoing. They're going to have due process, but we have a lot of questions.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says that Democrats are on the side of career criminals following the standing controversy during the State of the Union on Hannity.
On the world stage, but unfortunately it appears that Democrats, their brains have been so debilitated by Trump derangement syndrome that they can't even root for Team USA. They can't even stand when the president calls on them to do so for American citizens who they swear an oath to protect.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
Right now, somewhere in Nigeria, there's a Christian family being persecuted. Those who are not killed are often forced to flee their homes. At Equipping the Persecuted, they're committed to reaching every affected area and help heal the deep physical and emotional wounds that have been inflicted upon them. But they can't help them without your support. So please visit equippingthepersecuted.org and donate today. Sign up for just $35 a month. It's a little over $1 a day, and you'll help rescue Christians who are suffering and provide security, medical care, food, shelter, and love. The situation is urgent, so I'm asking you to join in the next 10 minutes. It's a life of fear and danger for these Christians, but for just over $1 a day, you can change everything. Go online to equippingthepersecuted.org and make a difference in the life of a persecuted Christian. That's www.equippingthepersecuted.org.
Hi, my name's Michelle Tankey and I'm the volunteer manager at the Lost Dogs Home. We've got 145 incredible volunteers that help us with a wide range of activities, including helping out in the laundry, taking dogs for a walk, doing activities with our enrichment program, administration, gardening, you name it, they're helping us around the shelter. Whether it's blowing bubbles to entertain kittens waiting for adoptions or even taking a dog for a walk, it's such an incredible positive impact on the animals. Volunteers are so important and special to this shelter because they support us in caring for thousands of animals each year. The impact they have enables us to do far more for the animals than we would be able to. For example, we can get on top of the huge amount of laundry we have. So the volunteers allow us to clean thousands more blankets than we could. It's incredible the amount of gifts that we're given by the public. We're so grateful for it. So if we get some toys, we can give them directly to puppies straight away to play with. Or towels, we can take them to our vet hospital for them to use immediately. So it's a really important job to help staff with. I would say to someone who's interested in volunteering to please get in touch. We would love to hear from you. We have an application form on our website that you can fill in, so please just detail all your skills and experience you can offer the shelter, and we'll be in touch when a suitable role comes up.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Welcome to the World Today. A very short program today, just the Protagonists, but nice to have your company. By the way, for the UK, it's 9 after 7. Get up now. I let you sleep in. It doesn't mean you miss Friday because for God's sake, just grow up. Get out of bed. In Queensland, it's 9 after 5. Those heading home have a great weekend. Don't forget the brolly. And for New South Wales and Victoria, it's 9 after 6, so have a magnificent weekend on the Gold Coast, which is the centre or the epicenter of the universe for intelligence and lubrilips, Botox and a beach. Leave out the intelligence bit, but we're going to have rain all weekend. So there you are. So I mentioned the word barbecue. See what happens? It rains. Now, ISIS brides and their children have ignited a firestorm for the government. Now, true to form, Anthony Albanese and Tony Burke are running for cover, and the coalition are playing dirty politics. The fact is that ISIS brides have been repatriated under this and previous governments. Australians need to know whether these individuals are or not a security threat, and surely this is essential. The questions need to be answered. If they are not, and can be successfully integrated back into Australian society as good citizens, the government should just say so. Why can't they say this? Now, this leads to another question, such as, is the Australian government jumping to the tune of an ISIS-led government in Syria, now supported by the US and its allies, that wants foreign citizens repatriated for their own reasons? The tragedy of Bondi was ISIS-inspired. Australians still have no idea what security features or failures occurred in the lead up to that tragedy and on that very day. Australians should be demanding proper answers from the government rather than the political spin playing out on mainstream media and some of the independent media outlets too. A Royal Commission won't give us the answers but buys the government time and will most likely lead to more concentrated power and fewer rights for law-abiding citizens. Now, our panel today is Shane Schmull, he's from the Australian Jewish Association, Jason Olborn, host at channel51.com.au, and Shane Healy, terrorism and youth justice expert. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I want to fire off the first question to Shane Healy. Shane, are the ISIS brides a risk to Australia? You probably need to turn your mic on. There we go.
What does risk to Australia mean? Are they going to, because there's difference between risk and threat.
All right, well, same thing. Threat.
So when you say risk to Australia, in what
threat?
context? Are they damaging a reputation? Are they going to conduct an attack? Is there a threat problem? Like, this is where the hysteria really starts, is the definitions. So they've been assessed. And, for example, I'm looking at one of the Zahab, Aminullah Zahab's assessment right now. Low risk. She's not an ISIS member. She was never an ISIS member. She followed a family member over there, and under Sunni Salafist ideology and religion, she just gets incorporated and swept up. She was put before an assessment by the Iraqi government, who deemed her to not be a member of the Islamic State, which is why she was in the refugee camp and not in an Iraqi jail, as there are many Australians with death sentences that the Iraqi government deemed to be members of the Islamic State. So when we say risk, do we really mean threat? And threat is intent and capability. Do any of these women have the intent to target Australian citizens? No, not at all.
Shane Schmull, what do you think?
Well, I have to sort of ask the question: how do we know that they're not necessarily a threat? How do we know the condition of their children who have grown up to be indoctrinated? At the end of the day, we had two people in Sydney. One was on ASIO's watch list, and yet he still went and carried out the Bondi attack in December. So when the government is telling us that they're assuring us that they're not a security risk, how can we trust their judgment given the son of the pair in December that he was on ASIO's list? So how do we have faith when they've denied that they're coming to the jail for several months? I think people have little faith in what the government is actually telling us in regards to these ISIS brides.
I conducted the risk assessments in the camps.
Okay, yeah, so...
Have you met any of these ISIS brides? Have you been to a camp? How many ISIS members have you actually met?
I haven't met any, but as an Australian, we had two here on their watch list. Well, one was on the watch list, and it still slipped through the cracks. So how can Albanese and Tony Burke give us ordinary Australians the assurance that nothing is going to happen once they do arrive here? And in particular, how do we know that they're not going to fall in the hands of some of these hate preachers like Wissam Haddad and Sheikh Dadoun? And, it's just...
Okay, so when was the date of the first repatriated family? Okay, hang on. So when was the date of the first repatriated family out of a refugee camp in Syria?
I don't know the actual original date.
June 2019. June 2019 was the first family repatriated from a Syrian camp to Australia, and that was Khalid Sharif's kids. They have not conducted any issues in Australia in 7 years.
Well,
so
do we know
the assessment process we undergo? Yes, we do. And the assessment process that they go through overseas, and then the intervention and rehabilitation inside Australia, is extensive.
So the other thing I'd like to get some clarity on: When they left this country to join this death cult, they also swore their hatred towards Australia, the end of Australia, and the end of the West. So
what evidence have you got
that
any of them did that? What evidence do you have that any of them actually did that?
We saw that some of them, I don't know if in particular these ones, we did see it on our own TV screens.
When?
So
when?
I don't
when
know.
Did you see any of this cohort? Well, then where does that accusation come from? That's just misinformation and an accusation with no evidence.
We actually saw it on our TV screens when they left.
When? When did they leave?
I don't remember the exact dates, but I'm just saying when they actually left.
Well, then you didn't see
when
it on
some
your
of them
TV
left
screen.
to go overseas, they swore an allegiance to ISIS.
When did they take the abaya? That is how you swear allegiance to ISIS. When did they take the abaya? How do you know these women took the abaya?
I don't know if it's specifically
well,
these women.
So then where's
there
that
was some
accusation
women.
come
So I'm
from?
not spreading misinformation. I'm actually communicating what we saw on our TV screens back then.
When did you see on your TV screen? Now, I was the first intelligence analyst into the caliphate in 2014 targeting them. I've interviewed and killed more ISIS members than any Australian. So I'm no fan of ISIS. But I want to know when you saw any of these women on TV leaving Australia and taking the abaya and joining on.
Like I've said already twice, I don't know specifically about these women, but some of them that left Australia at the time
did
swear allegiance. So for us Australians, we are concerned of what they're bringing back. And I think we have every right to feel that concern after what we saw.
Which is why they get assessed.
Okay, Shane.
So what do you? But okay, let's go back to Lint.
No.
Let's go back to all the other incidents that have been the joint counter-terrorism teams have stopped.
Shane, hang on. Otherwise, we have to also bring in Jason. Jason, what's your views?
All right. So hang on. Okay, we have a problem here with audio. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
We can.
Okay, all right. I apologise for that because at my end there's just a few technical issues. Also, because it's a beauty contest, I'm glad that I'm actually not seen at the moment, so I would run forth. You know, the thing that I've been trying to get my head around in this whole competition at the moment of ideas with the ISIS brides is just trying to find where, if any, is a middle ground. And today I'm reading about the mothers of the children who are saying the government owes it to the children to be able to do the right thing by these kids who are the innocent victims of this whole process. And so you look at it and then you think, well, what are you demonstrating that says that you want to participate again in Western society? And what was really interesting was that one of the mums was saying that my kids have been in here for years. We don't want to live in a tent. We want to live in a house. Well, that's the first stage of the reality of the normality, what we're trying to do. Is if you're going to repatriate, you've got to then ask yourself the question, are you really trying to repatriate or are you part of a very cunning plan, which is where this entire distrust comes from? So we go back to the old days when my parents came to Australia and they anglicised by changing their names in order to fit in, and that's what you did. You had to fit in with what's going on in the real world of Australia, the land that you wanted to come to. So we've certainly gone way past that now. That is not something that people do. They don't anglicise their names to fit in. But here we're learning that these children want to participate in Australian society, at the very least to be able to live in a house and not in a tent in a refugee camp. So you can't then take the ISIS bride mothers and say, well, it's up to the government to sort this out. You can't play victim when you have gone and played away from home one way or another, whether you're a 14-year-old bride and you've been caught up in this whole scenario. You've got to step up and you've got to say, well, we certainly don't support that and we want to move into the Australian way of life. So the next question I asked myself was, well, where are all the lefties with their GoFundMes wanting to fund the return if the government's not doing it? And the only person that I could find that actually put his hand up was a GP called Dr. Jamal Rifi, who I'm not sure if people are aware of. And he's a very interesting character because he comes from a section of Islam called Al-Habash, which is part Shia, but it's meant to be more passive. It's meant to be pro women. Or at the same time, they get destroyed by other factions that are saying we don't like you, and it's this whole thing going on. So we don't know what we don't know when we're looking at this. And I just find that where do we go next in terms of trying to make this a normal approach? How do we solve the problem? Or do we just put our hands up and say, look, we're not interested here, revoke citizenships, and you're on your own? So the fact that Albanese and Tony Burke is apparently a big supporter of Jamal Rifi, and they have worked closely to get a big donor, etc., a big supporter in the last election. So they've snookered themselves because they don't quite know what happens next. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter Jew, Gentile, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, any innocent child is an innocent child. How we deal with that is the hardest possible thing in the world, and it is really about the kids. If we're serious about this, and we've been talking about this in terms of child abuse for 10 years and the whole Epstein story, so where do we stand on it? And is that where we go back to first principles and work out if we're going to get past this idea of he said, she said, which is kind of tough for all of us?
Shane Healy.
Okay, so a few answers to that. A few answers to that. The number one NGO that has been working with the repatriations since 2018 is Save Our Children. And for me, I've never asked for or received 1 cent in all the work I've done in the repatriation and assessment space, because for me, it's about Save the Children. If my 2 young boys were in any of those camps, I'd kill everyone to get them out. They are disgusting. So that's where a lot of the money, the government will, and I can guarantee this, the government does not and has never put 1 cent towards getting any of the families out of the camp. They only start their support once they make it to the third country. So even if you look at the Sharif kids back in 2019, Tara Nettleton's mum was independently wealthy, and she could fund the NGO and Save Our Children who could get into the camps. Them to get out of the camps, the independent Red Crescent organisation organised the transport to the third country, and then the government took over the assessment and intervention phase from there. That's the way it works. If you look, Save the Children spent thousands of dollars taking Home Affairs to the Supreme Court to get women and children out of those camps. So this is not the biggest frustration I have is that everyone's acting like this just happened. This has been going on for 8 years. The government knew the camps were closing 3 years ago. Peter Lowe, who is Australia's leading CVE juvenile CVE expert, spent 2 years with the Iraqi government and the UN in the camps assessing Iraqi families, Sunni families that got caught up during the war and were being repatriated back into Iraq. You're not going to get a better expert than Peter Lowe, and she's the one also working in the space within Australia. Australia has the best experts in juvenile counter-violent extremism, so our government is already a step ahead. Now, like I said, if I thought that there was any risk to Australia, they'd be in the dirt in Iraq, and I've left plenty there. But I agree 100% about it's about the kids. And you look at the Miriam Raad matter, right? Miriam Raad came back to Australia and was put before the Australian courts. That's the Australian system. Australian citizen broke an Australian law, goes before the Australian courts. And her kids are with the family and safe. And that's got to be the piece that we've got to remember. Get these people home. They've broken Australian laws. Put them before the Australian court. If they are found to be guilty of an offence, put them in an Australian jail. No one's saying they get a free pass, but they're Australian citizens and they've got to be put under Australian law.
Can I ask you, Shane, because you know a lot more about this than the three of us do, what's the process on assessment and monitoring in the camps, or would this only happen in Australia?
No. So there's a couple of assessment tools that we use. So one is the Violent Extreme Risk Assessment tool that Home Affairs purchased from out of the Netherlands. and that's got a number of risk factors. And the other one is the terrorism risk assessment process protocols, 18 assessment for individual actors. And again, they're professional structure tools that have a number of indicators that you interview, you look at their history, you look at their presentations, and you put together a risk profile. If you actually go to my X account, I posted some of this up a couple of days ago to give people an understanding of what those risk categories and how that looks. And so you put that, and it's the same process. So everyone who gets charged with a terrorism offence in Australia that goes before Australian court goes through the Vera 2R process too. And the magistrates ask for that. Can I please see the Vera 2R for this individual? So even Naveed Akram will have a Vera 2R done about where they sat on that assessment prior to offending, at the time of offending, and then they'll continually get that. Like if you look at the Bambrika matter, that continually got updated as he was done rehabilitation and intervention strategies. And then when a magistrate deems that there is a low risk to Australian society, they might get bail or parole or go into an extended supervision order. But that's why we have continued detention orders. So if any of these women come back and they break Australian law, or they're deemed to have broken Australian law and they go to Australian jails, there's still mechanisms to keep them in jail in Australia.
You are right, Shane, and same with all the panel, that it is about the children. Shane Schmuel, I just put this question to you, and thank you, Shane Healy, for your information. We're just mere mortals. The only information we get is from media, legacy, or which is usually the spokesperson on most occasions for the government, or independent media, which gets it wrong at times. So the only information that we can go by is by a government gazette, government messages, or by legacy media. Shane Schmuel, and Shane Healy, I know what you're going to say about sometimes you can't have that transparency because of operational security. But Shane Schmuel, if the government had been more transparent, as Shane Healy said, it'd been going on for 3 years already. If the government had been more transparent, we wouldn't be at the situation, all of us talking, in some cases, just BS, because we are following the trail of information that is let out by the government and legacy media. So we're just going by. We are just trying to understand the whole kit and caboodle. We are kept in the dark, and then we have to try and work out what goes to what happens next, who's going to come in. So the misinformation that is, and you mentioned that Shane Schmuel had misinformation. Shane Schmuel is getting that from media or from government, and they're the ones that are feeding the people, me, Jason, everybody else, feeding them this misinformation. Shane Schmuel, would that be about right?
That is correct, and that's exactly where I got the footage from originally several years ago. So I don't remember the date, but that's where we all got that information from. But I think also the fact that when asked about it, there's constant denials, and then we find out later. That they're coming, and so that's because of that lack of transparency. We're asking those questions, but then also on the flip side. We're seeing a lot of Israelis having their visas denied over something that they might have said, but they're coming here to speak at a forum about a completely different topic. And so we're seeing different rules here, and we're seeing what we're seeing with Tony Burke is, and this is where several of the questions are coming from, is that he is doing what he can to keep his voter base and constituency happy, to save his seat and to save their government. A million Muslims versus 100,000 Jews in Australia. There's not a consistent approach across the board, and that's where there's a lot of distrust with this current government.
Jason, what do you think?
Well, this is, again, the scenario, isn't it? The lack of trust. Also, as Shane just explained there, the lopsidedness in population size is another interesting one that a lot of people don't really quite get their head around, and many would justify that it doesn't kind of mean a whole lot, does it? But if you think about, what are we talking about? 15 million Jews in the world, 2 billion Muslims in the world, just for comparison, and this crazy lopsidedness that ensures. And of course, you have an Australian public that has been on edge one way or another, whether you start from the COVID period and those people that bucked the system, let's say, back then, and they've got one opinion now on what's happening here in Australia. That's led to this huge upsurge in support for One Nation. The establishment reeling, this uni party being divided in itself, the Liberal Party not knowing where it's going. We are in a very confused scenario in Australia, and then you pile on cost of living and all of a sudden everyone's losing their minds, literally. And I know this is kind of going off topic, but if you're trying to get some form of consensus or trying to work out, have the Australian people got any more patience for anyone but themselves at this point, with a government that when it sees cost of living crisis puts its hands up and says we're just going to keep spending money on our agendas. You have a country that is literally going in a tailspin, and I don't know where we're going to find a genuine middle ground here, or are we headed for some sort of political revolution? South Australian election coming up shortly will be interesting to see if there's any sort of feedback there. And then you get into this other scenario where the opponents of the Labor Party juggernaut can't get traction at any level. So is it going to be an accidental victory, or is Labor going to get in again on some sort of default mechanism with the Australian people, and nobody is happy at that point? I just don't understand where we're going to find a middle ground at this point, because we are just all on edge with everything.
Shane Healy, the misinformation, and it is, but I understand why, some things you just can't talk about. If this had come out 3 years ago, it would be in all sorts of trouble. It would be very unfair.
In October 2024.
So one sec, hang on. And just if we go back to what James Shmuel was saying, what others are saying, it's the information that has been passed on by media or by government. Now, we understand again why government does things, sometimes they're very sneaky, and they all go, so we have to be transparent. That is impossible with some things. It is absolutely impossible. And so if they are not transparent, and myself, Shane, Jason, everybody on the street has a particular view, the only information we're getting is from legacy media and government, then I understand your frustration because you are at the coalface, but you would also understand that what we're doing is just not parroting, but we're putting an opinion together on information that's not right in the first place. How do we get around that, Shane?
So in October 2024, I was on panels like this having the same conversation about a previous cohort. If you Google my name and ISIS Brides, you'll see articles in The Guardian and The Australian from 2024 having the same conversation. That's my frustration at the government. We haven't educated the public in 2 years. Now, one of the things, there's no way the Home Affairs could have, and this is going to sound bad, anticipated was Bondi. Like, Chris Minns approved the repatriation, and this is open source now, in November 2025. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, you have the ISIS attack in Bondi. So that changed the landscape and the vitriol and the rhetoric in both the media and the public. And he, instead of coming out and being honest, he just kept making things worse. And even like today, there's been shootings, criminal shootings in Sydney weekly for 6 months. Why weren't police given long guns 6 months ago to deal with that? Why did it take a terrorism incident to give underqualified, undertrained, under-resourced police officers long guns? So that's the issue. They're just like putting out little scrub fires rather than doing a burn-off and getting in front of the problem. But for me, it all comes back to education. Why didn't Home Affairs get up and go, right, with this cohort, this is the assessment process they've been through. This is what, and the problem is the only evidence or footage you get out of the camps is on the ABC. They've got a couple of really good documentaries going right back to 2019 where Mark Willissey went in and interviewed the Nettletons. Then you go back to Miriam Radin that were interviewed in the camps. Now, when you talk about, I was in Israel working with Israeli defense, we'll call it, in 2015. And one of them said to me, Shane, you've got to, and I'm still very good friends with David, Shane, you've got to understand there's 9 million of us and there's 400 million of them, and they're trying to push us into the ocean. And so I get it. I felt it in that time, looking in their face, that constant threat, that constant war footing. I completely understand it in Israel. I don't get it here. So I see the complexities. The other misinformation, I won't say misinformation, I'll say uneducation, is that it's not Islam. You've got Shia Islam, you've got Sunni Islam, and within those two sects, you've got different branches. The branch that we've got trouble with is Sunni Salafism. And that's the religion or the branch of Islam that Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban believe. And what they believe in is that the world's become corrupt again, and we have to go back and live as we lived in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, because he was the last time that God sent someone down to show man how to live. And they believe that they can use force to make us all fit into that ideology. Now, in 2025, there were over 3,000 ISIS attacks in Muslim countries, killing over 5,000 people. So they target other Islamic sects more than they target the West. That gets lost in this discussion too. Mm. So it's not just they're targeting Australians or they're targeting Jews. They are targeting anyone who they deem is kuffar or a non-believer that doesn't believe in their ideology. That's the virus of these terrorist groups. You know, when I was in Iraq in 2005, they used to car bomb Shia mosques. They used to drive truck bombs into marketplaces and kill Iraqi Shia women and children. That's where my hatred for ISIS comes from, being in the middle of that. And that was 20 years ago. And so that's the kind of education I'm talking about. Understand the problem set. It's not all Muslims. It's not all anyone's. It's certain ideologies. It's like saying every white Australian's an idiot because of the National Socialist movement. No, they've got a certain ideology and belief structure that I don't believe and you don't believe. It's the ideology and the belief structure. Why do they think violence is allowed against us because we don't have that belief system?
And Mike, can I just jump in there? Yeah. And what Shane just said goes back to your question before about the media. And what we don't see on the media is exactly that point, because they do attack, and these are, radical Islamists, not just there in the Middle East, but like in Nigeria and Congo and so forth. We don't hear anything about what happens there. So often I'm debating these people and I ask them, well, when are you going to speak up for Congo and for Nigeria? Because the media doesn't actually take that on. It's not a big enough story for them. And we don't hear about the attacks in their own Islamist countries, because when you have these people say, oh, Israel is this and Israel that, and I'll ask them, well, what do you say about these radicals killing each other in their own countries, which goes back to exactly to what Shane was just talking about.
Mm. Jason, strong one. There you are. Sorry, cut Shane off. Jason, the media itself, and you worked with me at TNT Radio, and part of the reason why, and I always say this, we're not here, or TNT is not here, was because we wouldn't follow an agenda. And many times we got it wrong, but all the other times we got it right. And if we were wrong, we were to admit it. But we dug deep and tried to tell the truth. And our staff, our people that work for us, including yourself, and we had a lot of, Shane Healy, we had a lot of intel people from all sorts of organisations. And we were a little more privileged to know further the story, and you and I would probably have an argument on one of those. But so we were very lucky, but we did tell the truth, and as I said, when we made a mistake, we checked ourselves at all times. And again, Jason will know that because he knows that we were very passionate about trying to do the right thing. You've seen how not only legacy media, you've seen how independent media can distort, cannot tell the entire truth. And even if it's not the information that Shane Healy has, they will still twist it and contort it to either their sponsors or to those that run, say, News Corp or Channel 9. They will swing the story around, and I think all of you would agree with me that the narrative will change depending on who owns you. So how do we, Jason, being in the media for, what was it, 50, 60 years now, how do we dissect the BS? How do we get through the BS and try and find something that's a semblance of the truth? Because at the moment, we have government saying we're going to stamp out misinformation, and they are one of the great dishes out of misinformation. And for this reason, which Shane Healy has touched on, and I understand, I'm not saying that they shouldn't do this, but if you are going to be transparent, be transparent. If you are going to tell the truth, tell the truth. Don't tell them a bit of this and a bit of that, because at the end of the day, it will all catch up, and then credibility is gone. The trust in that particular organisation or government has gone, and the damage it does, which Shane Healy is attesting to at the moment, is horrendous. So Jason, how do we navigate through that and get to the truth? And at all times, tell the truth where we can. And if we don't know the truth, shut the F up.
Mike, this is the age-old question, isn't it, for independent media in this country that has stemmed from multiple different angles, such as citizen journalism from those that were working in mainstream media that for one reason or another left that, went back into normal life and then got back into it during the COVID period was the great reset of media, if you will, because that was where we were certainly divided, had a lot of time on our hands, etc. I maintain that the process in order for the truth to get out is to build something that is bigger than what we have at the moment. And it starts with the credentialing of independent media. So in the very first instance, anyone would want to be able to join some form of association, be able to get their press card and be able to attend press conferences, political, etc., and otherwise as a respected member of an independent media. At that point, you are then on a level playing field, which also then means that you are moving away from the idea that the misinformation laws that was kind of pushed through will no longer put the independent media on a different standard to those in the mainstream and to the government themselves. And this is something that, dare we say the U word, to perhaps unionise the independent media. You would all certainly have different ways that you could put that together through some sort of independent association, professional association. But I think that's the starting point. And from there, when you wear that as a badge of honour and you have an established credential, which the system demands that you do, we then move to another level and we are taken seriously. And suddenly, at that level, you have got equality within the media and you can no longer be denied. And then you can stand on your own 2 feet, because it's very easy to simply say, oh, you're from that part, we don't count what you say. And I can remember fighting this on Epstein stuff over the years, etc. You'd bring it up to a mainstream journalist when debating on social media, and they just pull the wool over your eyes and say, we're not interested in what you've got to say, and that was the end of the conversation. And all you need to do with disinformation or misinformation is put one wrong fact into something, discredit the person on that one wrong fact, and all of it is dismissed. And Hillary Clinton is the master of it, which we saw today, just to go off track again. But I think that's the big picture of where we've come from, because we have been burnt and tarnished over the years for getting everything right, as you mentioned earlier, certainly on COVID intel, certainly on Epstein intel that we were mocked at for many, many years as just two of the big stories of our time, Mike.
The Shane Healy, looking at Bondi, I have to say I was appalled at operations with the New South Wales Police Force. That's just me, and also the government, both federal and state governments, and then all the state governments around Australia decided to hop on their bandwagon and become very virtuous. Now, as a terror expert, as a military person, as you're very strong in your beliefs. How can it just two questions rolled up into one? How inept were they, all those that I've mentioned, in regards to the Bondi killings, which was appalling? And are we still open to a reenactment not too far down the track? Shane Hilly.
So I'll answer the second one first. Can you hear me, Mike? Yep.
I can indeed.
I'll answer the second one first. The yes is the short answer, and will always be the greatest threat to Australian society at the moment is that individual and small group lone actor threat, active shooter. But you go back to ISIS Khan, who was another ISIS fighter that conducted stabbings. He just picked a kitchen knife up, ran outside and started stabbing people. ISIS have done it, and Al Qaeda have done a very good job in producing online magazines, Inspire, Dabiq, telling people how to conduct. The Manchester bombings were actually the bombs that they built were from one of those magazines, and it was how to build a bomb in your mum's kitchen. So they didn't have to do any real research or external training. They got that information. So that's the greatest threat to Australia. So, and that's the greatest problem for law enforcement. There's a thing we have called the detection threshold. There's certain ways that law enforcement and intelligence agencies are always looking for these groups, these actors, to pop above the detection threshold. In this case, it seems that they use the law to their advantage, i.e. playing the long game to get licenses for their firearms rather than getting black market weapons. They went to rural New South Wales to conduct training. The efficiency that Naveed showed with that rifle, I've even spoken to former colleagues like Navy SEALs on that. And even in America, they're talking about how shocked they were at the proficiency. Now, I go all the way back to, I worked with the National Crime Authority that did the investigation into Martin Bryan. And they came up and we did some firearm demonstrations back then. So I've got a long history in looking into the proficiency of lone attackers, these individuals and their proficiency. And Naveed Akram, that is one thing that will be really pulled apart is the time frame. So there's a thing called the terrorist attack cycle, and its procurement of the weapons is in the early phases. The IEDs, where did they get that information from? Had they tested them? If you look at the Operation Pandanus, so another Islamic State-based group in 2005, they were in the research and development phase of conducting IED attacks. So they were letting IEDs go in the national parks, and police had started monitoring. And actually, there's footage online still of some of that. They purchased rocket launchers that were stolen from the ADF. They had thousands of rounds. They had SKSs. They were ready to go when law enforcement stopped that attack. And that was a multi-state, New South Wales and Queensland. So if you actually go through, for every one attack, law enforcement and intelligence agencies stop about 10. Australia's always, we had, especially for our number of citizens, we had over 300 Australian males go and join the Islamic State, to the point where the government, the AFP started pulling them off planes at Sydney Airport and wouldn't allow them go. And that's when we saw an uptick in, or a spike in, attacks domestically. And that's where the Western Sydney ISIS Waliyet started in earnest, because before that, people like Mohammed Barial were recruiting these Australians to go over and join ISIS. One of the number one logisticians for ISIS globally in Turkey at the time was Australian from Western Sydney, Mohammed Farag, Abu Australia Suleiman. So he's now number 3 in still over in Turkey with Al Qaeda. So we've had you look at the Sukaraya brothers. Jake Bellardi was a ISIS fighter who conducted a terrorist attack, drove a VBID into an Iraqi checkpoint in Baghdad. for some reason, Australia has always had that massive disagreement out in Western Sydney. Street Dawa has been very, it was on the ABC recently, but in 2014, 2015, that was done in high schools in Parramatta and in Bankstown. You'd have 30 or 40 teenagers receiving this street dawa every day. How I got into the CVE space was because in 2018, we had 7 convicted ISIS-inspired teenage terrorists in the juvenile justice system. So they were actually put before the courts and found guilty of, 2 young boys bought bayonets and were going to go around and stab police officers and members of the court in Bankstown, and they were stopped before they did that. Again, that's online. Another 16-year-old was recruiting adults out of his bedroom to go and join the caliphate. So Australia's always had this ingrained problem, and law enforcement have done, for the better part, a good job historically. They really made a mess this time, and is that because budgetary? Is that because it's not because the men and women at the JCTTs dropped the ball? I know that for a fact, but the threat nature within the context currently, it's bigger than we've ever seen it before. Like when I was at that peak in 2014, 2015, 2016, it was just ISIS. Now we've got China, we've got Iran, we've got the war in Russia and Ukraine, we've got 5th generation warfare, cyber warfare. We never had that 10 years ago. We just had ISIS in Iraq and the caliphate. Now they're looking at a lot more. So, yeah.
It's the when we started TNT, we actually had it was COVID. We thought this is the worst the world would ever get to. That's just that was the entree. Shane Schmuel.
I wrote the original threat assessment against the Chinese biolab in Wuhan in 2015.
Wow. You clever boy. Stop it. I got to talk to other people, Shane. Shane Schmuel, the Jewish community, I mean, it was to say terrible, horror, dreadful, it always seems quite trite. It's not. It's no words can describe. The fear that the Jewish community having, as Shane Healy said, yes, there is a chance it might happen again, that must strike enormous terror and fear, not only through yourself, but through the whole community. Have they had further discussions with, for example, New South Wales, but it doesn't have to be New South Wales, it could be any state. What's the attitude of the Jewish community at the moment? Is there a heightened sense of stress and alertness? Do you feel that you are part of Australia? Do you think we are doing enough? And all these questions, just fill me in.
Yeah, and going back to the first part of the question is, when Bondi happened, we weren't surprised. We've been warning about this for 2 years. When you appease, you enable, and you embolden those that actually, through their rhetoric. I mean, let's be honest, the Holocaust didn't start with the concentration camps. It started with the rhetoric, the normalization of hate. And we've seen that progressively happen over the last 2.5 years. So when Bondi happened, we weren't surprised. We were shocked because of what had actually had happened. If it was to, as Shane Healy says, it could happen again, we're still saying that. We say that this could happen again because we have a government who actually is too busy worrying about, or is more concerned with their ideology than actually doing what their sole purpose or their top priority is, to keep the safety and security of Australians, to keep them safe. And so we are not seeing that. When you see, for example, yesterday, a teacher escaped, an Islamic teacher escaped conviction for assaulting a counter-protester in September because he was suffering from anxiety because his brother was on a flotilla sent to Israel. What message is that sending? That there is no consequence, and that is what we're seeing. And so, if something else was to happen, if we were to experience another attack, we wouldn't be we wouldn't be surprised, because we don't feel we have a government who is actually putting the safety and security of Australians at its top priority.
Yeah, I agree almost to that part. I think the Dr. Frank Romano is doing his fifth trip now to Gaza by boat, and they are heavily armed with baby formula and medical supplies and stuff like that. Frank, by the way, has been in Israeli prisons now 4 times, and I think he's collecting frequent flyer points. But
and the interesting thing, sorry to just jump in there, but they've said that they're carrying baby formula and so forth previously, and when they actually arrived, they were found to have very little of it. So it's not that they were loaded up with all this materials; it's just part of their narrative.
I disagree, because it was Frank's boat, and truly, and I respect your views, but again, I know 101% it was baby formula and medical supplies, and when it comes to Frank Romano, I trust him very, very much. But I do understand other occurrences, yes, possibly, but this is just purely because it's Frank's boat, and he's a very dear friend, and I do trust him. Jason, thoughts on a reenactment, another terror attack in Australia? What does the media need to do to play down the sense of stress?
Well, first and foremost, the events of the week after the horrific events of December 14, we saw that incredible ceremony, effectively, where the Jewish community got up and spoke and reflected upon the great losses. I have never seen anything more magnificent in my life in terms of a public a ceremony. Rabbi Eli Schlanger, the late rabbi whose father-in-law spoke, his speech was as close to messianic as you could ever expect to see. In fact, if a Jewish Messiah were to appear, he would speak the words that were spoken that day. There was a great rise. There was no call for revenge or reparation. It was, what do we do from here? We are Australians. We came on the First Fleet, and we're not going anywhere. One thing's for sure, the Jewish Australian people are not the Israeli government. And you say what you like about the Israeli government, this is not the community here in Australia. I think that is the first thing that we learnt first and foremost on that night. So we can't go and have this great big pile on because people are upset with what Netanyahu may or may not be up to over there, taking care of business in his eyes, which is to eradicate terrorism from the face of the earth. That would be where he's going. How that comes in Australia, I don't quite know where we're going to go, because the mainstream news generally will come across as pro-Israel from the perspective that says that there is an undercurrent of hatred towards the Israeli government, and by extension becomes the Jewish people. Now, if you support what someone says that they want to push the Jews into the sea, like you might argue the Grace Tame was saying that as well, well, she effectively words came out of her mouth, then you are supporting the eradication of a people that is beyond racist at that point and is totally unacceptable. So how do we cool the jets? And is the media, who is distrusted, and I say mainstream media, are they going to be the answers? And I don't think it is. So I think that what's really happening here is that mainstream media is cracking in all parts now and are simply not trusted, but the system is waiting for something to stand in its place. But I tell you what, if the Jewish community of Australia can represent the Jewish people of the world the way they did that night in late December, things will change, because that was just absolutely magnificent in time of absolute crisis, Mike.
I've just got to say, and it's all very well saying they're going to push the Jewish people into the sea, but don't forget the Israeli project too. And it says here the boundaries of this territory run from the Nile River in Egypt to the Euphrates River, which flows through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. So that also is of concern. And I think Shane would probably agree, because it is of concern. It's going to create conflict, whether you like it or not, if they go ahead with that.
Well, I think that's more biblical more than anything else.
Well, not so much now. I mean, we are getting a bit of, in Israel, especially with Netanyahu, we are getting a bit of traction. Whether that, and I agree with you, I understand where you're coming from, that's going to have the momentum to move on, but it's out there, isn't it? And it doesn't help by, it adds to the fuel of this fire. And but you know, it's so we need to stop, basically, Shane, we need to stop killing everybody. We need to stop killing people. Simple as that. Stop killing each, and it's not going to happen. If you look at history, that ain't going to happen in a blue moon. I don't know what you're going to do. One guy might have an idea, Shane, is Shane Healy. How do you stop this, Shane Healy? Is it ever going to be stoppable, or are we going to have bloodshed on either side?
Well, I'll get to that in a sec. I just need to correct a few things. Currently in Australia, attacks on mosques are up 300%, and that's out of statistics from state law enforcement and the AFP. There is no reporting in the last 2 years that attacks in the Jewish community are up from the AFP or any state law enforcement. That's actually Googleable. The part of the problem is the Jewish community report all their incidents to the community security group. That needs to stop. They need to start going to the local police station and reporting it. Therefore, law enforcement and the government can actually have statistics they can act on. Second of all, one of the biggest issues that the Australian government have got with the Israeli government is they got no support when they were trying to find out how the Australian aid worker Yoni Frankham died. They sent Air Marshal Biskin over to conduct an investigation, and he was basically told, "You're not coming anywhere near us. We don't care. Go away." That started annoying the Australian government, and you saw government rhetoric change around that time. Now, answering the question, is it ever going to stop? The answer is no. Part of the problem, and I don't blame Israel for this, was the 6-day war. They've already been ambushed and attacked by all the Arab countries on their border. And like I said, I've been there, I've worked with them, I completely understand their ingrained fear that they are continually fighting an existential fight for survival in Israel. That's not Australia. I know this is going to cause some trouble, but the AFP commissioner has came out and admitted this. The Jewish community was not the target at Bondi in December 2025. The target was picked well in advance. Bondi is very public. Bondi Rescue is all over the world. They knew they were going to get the biggest bang for the buck. That attack started 3 years earlier when they started buying rifles, getting their dawa done, making their pledge to the abaya, going out and starting weapons training, getting weapons licenses. That's coming out of the Royal Commission. That's part of my evidence in the Royal Commission. That's part of the AFP's evidence in the Royal Commission. It was very opportunistic, no doubt about it, right? But just because two things can be true at the same time. Yes, they did shoot all the Jewish people celebrating there, but that target was picked long before. They didn't just wake up one day and go, that festival's on tomorrow, let's go down there tomorrow. They were planning on targeting Bondi Beach well in advance. That's got to be taken into context. You know, we went through this with Lint after the Lint Cafe siege, and that was very personal to me. You know, my ex-father-in-law's chambers were on the 8th floor above Lint. I was actually in the Middle East fighting ISIS, and my ex-wife and my new baby were going there every day to meet her father-in-law. So I could have been drawn up in that, and I was actually helping New South Wales Police via email and live into the Police Forward Command Centre during that. You look at the same thing after Port Arthur, after the Bali bombings. Now, this is lost on a lot of people, but the Bali bombings started in Sydney in 1998. The Abu Bakr Bashir, who was the head of Jamaat Islamiyah, which was an Al-Qaeda affiliate, used to pray and live on the northern beaches at a mosque there. When we were coming into the Sydney Olympics, we knew this, and ASIA rounded them up and deported them all. And so because they knew 9/11 was already going to happen. It was already, again, 2 years into the works, getting those guys over, getting them trained to fly planes. They knew that was going to happen. But because they weren't in Australia, they weren't actually able to target Sydney Olympics. That was the first goal, not 9/11. But because they weren't in Australia, they had to target Australians, and that's how the Bali bombing started. And the same kind of happened in the UK with the July subway attacks over there. So Australia's got a deep history of terrorism, and we've always risen. It's very sad that it happens every time, but law enforcement get it right a lot more than they get it wrong, and that gets lost because of emotion. And so they might get it wrong in there's always a famous saying in the intelligence world, you only hear about us when we fail. You don't hear about our successes. And I think, it's sad and it's disgraceful. It should never happen in the past. And there's many men and women that work long hours daily to try to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Can I ask, as we're going to wrap this up, have gone over a bit, and I don't apologise. I think it's a very, very important conversation, and you're all just simply magnificent, in my humble opinion. Shane Schmuel, okay, what do we need to do because we have this conflict? We're talking about it right now. We have the misinformation about ISIS, the ISIS brides, blah, blah. We have talking about Bondi, all conflict, great wedge down the middle of Australia. What do we need to do, Shane Schmuel, what do we need to do to make Australia what it used to be like, that could laugh at itself, that had, and I'll say it lovingly, we used to do it, I had Dagos on one side and Turks on the other side of my house, and we all got together and we had all sorts of magnificent people, different nationalities, and Jewish people, incredible. I mean, you had some great parties. How do we get back to that and get rid of this wedge that I think is politically driven beyond all belief, that we have these absolute buffoons who are running this country and doing all they can to shut me up and you up and them up and create this great divide, divide and conquer. How do we get back to what a community used to be like? And that community was called Australia.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and we've spoken about this before, and I think it comes down to ideology and what we are tolerating in this country. We seem to be tolerating the intolerable and allowing that to go unchecked. And I think we never used to have this kind of issue because we didn't tolerate it. Also, it hadn't arrived yet in Australia, and I think that's what we need to get on top of. Stop tolerating the intolerable and getting back to where we were, where we don't, when I see you on the street, I don't weigh you up as to whether you're white, black, male, female, what your religion is. I look at you as another human being, and I think we need to get back to that and bringing that back into the classrooms, bringing back the love for Australia into our classrooms. As a child, and my children have done it at the same school, is singing the national anthem, commemorating the sacrifice of our soldiers, on Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, and stop teaching that Australia is some colony that must fall. Otherwise, we will continue going down this rabbit hole.
Jason, how do we fix it? How do we get back to, what are you now, 78 or something? But in your time, you would have gone to school with Ned Kelly. In your time, though, you saw Australia. It was a community. We had, I went to a Catholic school, sitting on logs eating frogs. And I was told I'd go to hell if I had Protestant friends. Anyway, hopefully that's wrong. But we used to laugh at ourselves, but we used to take ourselves less seriously. And the community was what made, and it was one of the appeals for the rest of the world, how Australia had this almost larrikinism, freedom about itself, that didn't take itself too seriously, but it had this community that was second to none.
Isn't it tough to think that our best days, as described, we would consider would be behind us, but in actual fact, they've always got to be in front. So the starting point is always affordability, and I think that's where the problem is at the moment, is that we're living in an economic Ponzi scheme, that the only way that the government of the day can make the figures look right is to keep bringing more and more people in, despite having a GDP per capita recession. So the starting point, therefore, is to obviously think big. It's economically based, and that would be resources based. So there has to be a whole new set of ideas amongst the political class that's going to come up with some plans. And I know, as somebody who worked with Clive Palmer in the past, he had some great plans in terms of our minerals and resources, and I believe that Gerard Rennick's probably the closest today at coming up with something fresh and new that's going to be able to do that. But you also have to be healthy, and you also have to have the permission to be able to speak. And I'll tell you what, censorship is never the answer. Now, I've got family members that work in the comedy industry, in comedy clubs, and I get weekly updates on what you can and can't say and who was cancelled and not. And only yesterday I was listening to the great British comedian Jimmy Carr explaining that you have to understand that when you're in that type of room, it's the audience that tells you where you're allowed to go at any given stage. So it's living it in the moment and the reaction that you get from it. But it seems that we're overrepresented by mouthpieces and influencers today that doesn't necessarily say what the electorate's thinking. If you picked up a newspaper, left wing or right wing, you would think that the woke people still own the country. But if you look at the poll, One Nation polling #1 in Victoria, virtually #1 now across the country, that's the exact opposite of reality. The first point is, let's stop censoring. Let's allow comedy clubs to tell jokes in their jokes. Don't go if you're going to be offended. And let's grow a little bit of a thick skin and stop being offended by what other people are saying. We all really want the same thing, as illustrated in this article I mentioned at the beginning of the show. The ISIS brides themselves want their kids to come to Australia to live in a house and not in a tent. For goodness sake, if that's all we all want the exact same things. It doesn't matter what we believe in. Can we start there and and realise that we all want the same thing, and Australia is the best place in the world to be able to want that and to achieve it.
And Shane Healy, you're an ex-military, and I have the utmost respect for anyone that fights for their country. You are prepared to sacrifice the very essence of yourself, and that is you're either killed or maimed or whatever. So you've done your bit, and you did that because you love Australia. It's simple as that. And you're a pretty rough bloke. You're a tough bloke. You're a good bloke. You call a spade a shovel. And when we grew up, we would have, if you call me a dickhead or something like that, I'd go, oh, get stuffed and go and have a beer, or laugh it off, or say, yeah, probably right. We haven't got that anymore. We have this divide through this country. It is heading in all sorts of directions, and we haven't got the tolerance or the love for the country that we used to have. How do we get it back?
As you know, half of my family is Indigenous, and this is when it started, when we started doing the Invasion Day rallies, when the Indigenous community rose up and said, who are we? And then that made the Australian public ask, who are we? And we never answered that question. And every year now, the Invasion Day rallies get bigger and bigger. And until we answer that question in our schools, in our universities, and in our government, we're always going to be divided. At least one day a year, what is Australia Day? Who does Australia Day represent? The fact that every year we still argue about, should it be on the 26th of January, is where the division started, and COVID exasperated it because we lost all trust in the government. But if you go back through the timeline, when did the division started, and around what subject did we start to see Australian society fracture? It was around the Invasion Day rallies on the 26th of January. And all of a sudden people started questioning what it is to be Australian. Before that, they didn't have a voice. So, like, I have relatives that were part of the original tent embassy in Canberra. Well, mums, aunties and uncles and that, right, from out of the mission. That's when it started, when they started getting a bigger voice, and that younger generation, my cousins and others, started coming in and having big marches. And that's what we should have answered the question then. That was 25 years ago. And it's just building and building, and we're fracturing our communities. And, I said this at the time when we saw these young, and the majority of those teenagers I spoke about that were charged and convicted for terrorism offences were born in Australia. Second generation, their parents fled. Their parents know what it was like to grow up in a war-torn country, and they love Australia. But these kids that grew up in Australia but don't know what it is to be an Australian, they're the disenfranchised ones. And we haven't fixed that in 20 years. Unless we fix that problem, what it is to be an Australian, we're always going to be divided.
Well, shivers up my spine. Thank you, Shane. Shane Schmuel, Australian Jewish Association, on the committee there. If somebody wants to find out more about the Australian Jewish Association or yourself, how do they do that?
You can go to our website, jewishassociation.org.au, and you can see what we're about. You can actually, there's a page there on who is part of the group, and you'll see a bio on me and the others as well. So, yeah, check out the page.
Fantastic. Jason Olborn, host of channel51.com.au. Anywhere else they could find you?
Look, you can find me on X at JasonQCitizen1, but all my work's at channel51.com.au, and it all starts from there, and we cover topics from all around the world with a focus on the great disruption period that we're living in right now that promises to somehow come out the other side a better world than we started from, despite where we feel we are today.
And Shane Healy, as you were wrapping up before, I was thinking we have to get you on to talk about these things. So thank you very much for your insight today. Appreciate it more than you would understand, and I admire you very much. Anyone who fights for their country basically deserves the utmost respect, and I think in this country we should probably follow a little more what the Americans do and how they respect their military. Anyway, another topic. Shane, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that? You probably need to turn your mic on, just that last bit. Where's your mic? You got to turn it on.
Mainly on X, Terrace Hunter 6 is where I post and everyone can find me. We just want to thank everyone. This is the conversation that the mainstream media has been dodging since December. And conversations like this is what educates the public and takes the fear and the nonsense out. So we just really want to thank everyone for tonight.
And I've got to thank all of you. It's been a great way to finish the weekend, a lot of thinking to do, and I'll do that with a few whiskies. I'm not going to tell you how that ends up, but it's not going to be pretty. Thank you very much to our audience. We appreciate you very much. We are just rejigging things a bit at the moment. And I have to tell you, we put in 24 hours, Jen and myself, between us putting out a program. That's 12 hours each. Jen is up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning at times, and we're getting worn out. So we've got to work out a way of not carking it on the air. I mean, just imagine I could fall over, die on the air. Great for our numbers, but not for me. So to everybody, thank you so much. We'll catch you again on Monday. This has been The World Today and The Protagonists. Have a great weekend.